Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Victoria Brokes. I'm Director of London Design Biennale, and I'm delighted to welcome you to London Design Festival 2020 and for today's Global Design Forum in conversation to be welcoming to the stage Ez Devlin. Ez Devlin is an artist and designer. Her projection mapped sculptures are often created as environments for performing artists, opera, dance and theatre. Her solo works include Mirror Maze at Copeland Park in Peckham in 2016, Room 2022 at Miami Art Basel 2017, Poem Portraits at the Serpentine Gallery and the Singing Tree at the V&A in 2017, Mask at Somerset House in 2018, and her large-scale collective poetry work in Trafalgar Square for 2018's London Design Festival. Please Feed the Lions. Her stage sculptures include collaborations with Beyoncé, Kanye West, U2, Adele, the Royal Opera House, the National Theatre, and the London and Rio Olympic ceremonies. She runs the multidisciplinary design practice Studio Ez Devlin and is the winner of numerous awards, including 3 Olivier Awards, the 2017 London Design Medal, and a UAL Fellowship, and an OBE. Ez Devlin's work was the subject of a documentary in the Netflix series Abstract: The Art of Design, and she's been chosen for the much coveted commission to design the UK pavilion at Expo, now 2021, in Dubai. Ez is also the artistic director of London Design Biennale 2021, which will take place at Somerset House next June. Please welcome to the stage Ez Devlin.
Thank you so much, Vicky, for that lovely introduction. And actually, thank you for the Global Design Forum. Thank you for inviting me, London Design Festival, to do this talk. Actually, it's a little ironic that the title of the talk is In Conversation, because I think for the next 30 minutes, I'm actually going to be in conversation basically with myself. So I hope you don't mind being witnesses to a somewhat self-to-self conversation here. But after about 30 minutes, I will stop conversing with myself and I will invite you all to ask some questions. So I will have an actual in-conversation with you. So I invite you at this point, while I am talking, at any point, if you can think of a question that you'd like to ask, then please put it in the chat. So you can just not have that embarrassing moment at the end when I say any questions and nobody's got any. As you go, put some in the chat and then I'll look through them and answer as many as I can in the last 15 minutes of the talk. A conversation with myself actually is somewhat appropriate as an expression of my past 6 months. Because as you may know, my speciality throughout the past quarter century of my practice has generally been in the art of mass gatherings. A somewhat temporarily extinct art at the moment. And I've spent part of this period of the last 6 months alone in my studio for the first time in many years, actually. And it's given me an opportunity to explore the processes that underpin much of the work, which I'm going to talk about a bit later in this talk, and also to progress a book about the practice, which was commissioned quite a long time ago. I've been perfecting the art of procrastinating in writing this book. I've procrastinated for 4 years since it was commissioned. Every month I write a little excuse as to why I haven't done it. And this 6-month hiatus in mass gatherings has been the most amazing opportunity to write the book. And of course, I'm still procrastinating vividly on writing this book. But what's happened in the writing of the book during this period is a new light has been cast on the work that populates this book. Because much of what I'm putting in the book involves what I consider to now be a temporarily extinct species, which is the audience. So the other thing I want to talk about for the next half an hour, as well as my process, is I really want to scrutinize this extraordinary temporarily extinct species called the audience. The processes are the things that I would say we find beneath or behind or within the work, and the audience being the framework that's outside or in front of the work. And I'm interested to explore today how those two intertwine. Part of the book has taken the form of a series of conversations with collaborators and with artists who are friends or colleagues who I'd love to collaborate with, who I feel I should collaborate with and want to collaborate with. So there are 28 conversations in the book. And that I have been quite good at not procrastinating on, because having conversations is much easier than writing a book. So I've done a lot of that. And one of the conversations that I had was with my dear friend, colleague, and the amazing choreographer, Akram Khan. And he expressed, I think, most accurately what many of us who work in performance have been feeling during this period. He talked about his grief at not being able to perform. And he was forensic about specifically what he was missing in this hiatus and temporary extinction of performance. What he talked about, and what I really want to dig into with you, is the quality of time that performers experience on stage, and the quality of time that we experience as an audience witnessing performance. And what Akram reminded me is that, of course, clock time, digital time, mechanical time is such a recent phenomena in the history of our species. Let alone the history of all the other bloody species. So Akram talked about how important it is for our cultural health, for our spiritual health, to experience the passing of time in ways that are not governed by mechanical processes, digital processes. He talked about storytelling time, the rhythm of the unfolding of a narrative, the quality of time passing when you tell a story, the quality of time passing when you listen to a story being told. And my own observation of audiences from a quarter of a century of being with them, among them, in them, for them, by them, everything that I have made so far has been pretty much for an audience. The audience, which is currently tragically, temporarily, we hope, extinct, is an expert in listening to stories. It's really expert. The audience as a beast, it's a storytelling expert. And of course, it's deep in our ancestral memory. It's not just in our culture, but it's in our biology. It's part of our means of survival. And I'm sure many of you have read the Yuval Noah Harari books, Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus, which remind us that storytelling, collective imagination, collective investment in shared fiction, any partial reading of his books immediately reminds you that these are the basis on which our survival and success as a species was founded. So the audience is expert in receiving and also in critiquing story. And you can feel this, you can feel, or you used to be able to feel, when audiences existed, you could feel their expertise when you sat among them. I remember I would sit in the audience of something I had made, and I could feel when the audience were getting it and when the audience were not getting it. I spent time, in the interval. I would spend time in the interval of a performance in the bar or in the waiting room or in the toilet, and I would pick up, what audiences were feeling and saying, and you could feel it when you're sitting among them in the audience. Actually, there's nothing worse than having made a piece of communication for an audience and sitting among the audience and feeling the loud noise of them failing to understand what you were trying to communicate. And the humiliation of that actually is one of the big drivers, I would say, of my practice. The humiliation I've experienced in the failure of my attempts to communicate to an audience is something that is like a fierce sting of not wanting to experience that again. So therefore trying to hone one's art of communication so you didn't have to live through that experience of humiliation again. And what I found about audiences is they're usually quite unanimous. So they all start coughing at once when it's boring, when they find time is passing too slowly. They all actually become intensely silent. When you've managed through the craft of organizing their time for them to intensify their experience of time, they'll go very quiet. And actually, they will all all the members of an audience will cry. If you, like a chef working a recipe, if you concoct the precise fusion of music and narrative moment correctly, then you can access audiences' compassion, and they will all quietly cry at the same time as one connected beast. And in that sense, coming back to Akram's point about what we miss when we don't gather together and receive performance and story together, this quality of time, I would say therefore that I've been looking back at my own practice and viewing these objects that I've made almost as clocks, sculptures, clocks that mark the passing of time for an audience. I'm going to try and screen share now. Let's see if it's beyond the technical capabilities of me, but I'll give it a go. Here we go. Can everyone see a little drawing of a person with a cube? Nodding, thank you, friends. This is weird because as I've been putting this book together, I dug out in my archive old drawings. I mean, these are really old drawings. This is a drawing I haven't actually shown to anyone before, so you are the first people to see these drawings before the book comes out, which isn't for a while. Sneak preview. I kind of was shocked when I found this bloody drawing because it's me fighting with a cube, which is what I've spent the next 25 years of my life bloody doing. But anyway, I did this drawing, I think, when I was about 18 or 17. And then there were more, which were drawings about a person, me, in space. I don't think these are particularly original drawings. Probably most of you in the audience have done these drawings, and many teenage girls have probably done these drawings. But it's part of the nature of humans to find ways of positioning themselves in space, telling their story in the relation to objects. And it just kind of surprised me that these were all in relation to this big cube, either clinging on to it, or bigger than it, or littler than it, or caught in it, or stuck in it, or towering over it. And the picture I wanted to show you that pertains to what I was just talking about is this one. So this is, in fact, a picture of two windows. I used to have this practice, and I still do, of waking up in the morning and purposefully switching my alarm clock on for 20 minutes before I actually need to get up. And the reason I would do that is because I wanted to meditate somehow on the line of light that comes through my window and access a more primal pre-clock time, pre-digital mechanical clock time. And this has been my developing way of doing it. The particular two images that you see here happened, I used to, in the before times, when I used to make works of mass gathering all over the planet. I used to find myself sometimes waking up in various hotel rooms, and this line of light would kind of be some kind of continuum in my journey, peripatetic existence around the planet. And in this particular instance, I woke up and it was dawn on the left in Los Angeles. And this was the image I took when the sun rose through the slot, the chink of light through the curtains. And then I got on a plane, and by the time I got back to London, it was sunset in London. And I took a photograph of the light landing on the wall through my curtains in London. And I realized that I was using these apertures, these framing devices, almost regarding the architecture through which I was passing as a kind of clock, as a kind of sundial, as a way of connecting myself in a rather discombobulated existence, connecting myself with a more ancient way of telling the time through framing the light from the sun. And in fact, these are some really early works. This one was from 1999, 2000, with the Rambert Dance Company. And these were quite important works in a way, because they were the first, when I first got a chance to make anything, I mean, I was interested, looking at the book, to think, what did I make when someone said, you can kind of make anything? And it was these apertures of light, these slots of light. And I think it was something to do with wanting for an audience to be able to access this quality of telling the time through controlled light and through giving people a glimpse of a world beyond the world they're in, which is what those narratives, those dance pieces, those stories that I was trying to express were also trying to do. How do you crack open a wall in our current understanding of existence? How do you just tear a tiny strip from it and say, look, there is something beyond, there are other ways to look. This is again from that same piece. It was an aperture that moved, so you could really sort of medically, forensically medicate the audience with dispensing them with degrees of light at different degrees of the show. This was an earlier piece actually from 1998. Again, this kind of metering out like a clock of time throughout the show. And this was a film that was made many years later in 2008, but again using the same device of metering out slices of light. And this current of work has persisted right up until now. This is the piece that's actually going to be on next Monday, if you happen to be available. I can't tell you the time yet because of mass gathering restrictions. So I'll be only able to tell you the time on the day. But it's going to be this line of light that we made as a response to the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's a piece that got delayed. It was supposed to be performed in the big screen in Piccadilly Circus. It got delayed, and it's now gonna happen on Monday at a time to be specified. So another device that I've now decided actually could be interpreted as a clock, as a metering out of time for an audience, is this cube that revolves. And I get asked quite a lot, why am I interested in these cubes? And I've realized actually, it's not really just the cube. It's not the cube that's so much the fascination, although cubes are satisfying things. It's the rotating cube. That's really the point of it. Because when a cube is rotating, it somehow, for me, emulates the experience that an audience is used to in receiving time through film. So many of us as audience are mainly receiving our story through moving image, which is obviously really just a sped up series of frames being passed before our eyes, running laterally across the screen. And actually, when you rotate a cube, you emulate that sense of moving image in a way, and you help the audience to perceive episode and to perceive time passing, because the audience can't move. And more when we're dealing with a static audience, we're dealing with an audience that's used to movement, and movement and story are often commensurate with each other, the pace of movement, the pace of storytelling in film. So I guess these kinetic sculptures have been, for me, a way to emulate that. And just to unpick the process a little bit behind this show, which was a play called Chimerica that took place in 2013 at the Almeida Theatre. It was a complicated piece of writing with 64 scenes, so written very much, I would say, as a film script, with the kind of possibilities of cutting and editing and scrolling that film techniques allow, and flitting back and forth between China and America, between multiple interwoven stories in the way that the audience has become accustomed to receiving these complex intertwined stories. And the process of developing this started with this model. This is a photograph of just turning a model and trying to figure out what it could do. But equally, this is quite an interesting page of sketches that I found. The sketches on the left are not mine. They were done by Lindsay Turner, the director of this piece. And the sketches on the right are mine in response. And what's really interesting is that what we're really sculpting is time. We're sculpting the time that we're trying to express of the various narratives that are interwoven, and we're sculpting the audience's time, and we're trying to find a meeting place. So we're making a multi-clock in a way, a physical clock that's turning for the number of hours of that show. And there's another whole load of documents that I don't have to share with you, but that many of the team members who worked on this piece kept different clocks. So there's the guy called Ben, and Ben lived inside the cube every night. Because Ben, this was a very low-tech cube, and the doors on the side of it opened and closed only because Ben had two little pulleys, and he was literally trapped inside this thing all night pulling those pulleys. So Ben had a different clock on to the rest of us. Ben had his pulley clock, right? And I've done that job, that backstage job, and you have a completely different clock. Your clock goes from when the clown is going to throw you, a bunch of flowers that you have to catch, to when your next cue is, and you have to pull the lever to not drop Charlie Chaplin's daughter because you're lowering her off a high wire. So there are many clocks at work, and these drawings illustrate just a couple of them. The other way that a turning cube can be a clock is the clock that you need to evoke when you're trying to manage a different material, which is the audience's love and expectation. You have to meter this out. So if you're working, I think, on a pop concert, you've got an audience who, there's the most brilliant, by the way, if ever you want to understand what a pop concert is, I really advise you all to watch the most brilliant Anton Corbijn documentary on Depeche Mode. I watched it on the plane the other day, and I couldn't really believe that I'd not seen it till now, because what he does is he travels to visit and to interview 6 members of the audience, and they're really specific Depeche Mode fans. One of them, the only thing she can remember in her whole life, because she had a terrible car crash and lost all her memory, the only thing she can remember is one Depeche Mode song. So the rest of her life, she clings to this. And then there's all sorts of other stories. A guy who can only see his children because they're in a Depeche Mode covers band. And you realize when you understand these stories that what you're seeing happening for an audience when they come and congregate, in this case in Berlin, to watch a Depeche Mode gig, is time is being accessed at multiple levels, right? So these kids and their dad are being connected through layers and layers of time as they watch the show. This woman whose memory was lost is literally stitching herself together at this show through her connection with this music. And when you multiply that, you're only shown 6 stories, but that's enough to help you go, okay, well, if that's happening with just 6 of these people, imagine the quality of time being experienced through collective connected memories and access to these points of reference of these particular congregations of lyrics and music. Imagine that multiplied by 100,000 people in the stadium. So that's what's going on at a Beyonce concert, which again starts with, some simple drawings, and the quality of time passing is, multiplied a 100-fold for the people who are sitting again inside this large LED cube, ensuring that it's actually going to turn on time and that it's going to work. A particular example actually is the Lehman trilogy. I'm just going to share with you these notes, just again to sort of lift the bonnet a little bit on process, which I think might be interesting. These are the notes that were written by Sam Mendes, who directed the play called the Lehman Trilogy that we worked on at the National Theatre and on Broadway, and which will, inshallah, tour the United States if the currently extinct audience is revived and the practice of mass gathering is revived. His notes to me were so wonderful. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story. He came in, Sam Mendes, into my studio, the wonderful film director, and he said, I'm going to write a few notes. And he took a really large, expensive piece of foam core. And if any of you work in any kind of model making, you'll know that foam core is not the most environmentally conscious stuff, but it's incredibly useful. And it's really expensive. Like a sheet of it is £12. So I was a bit devastated that Sam was jotting these notes on my beautiful sheet of foam core that I was saving to make a nice model with. But anyway, the notes he wrote were so great that I've now kept them on my wall ever since. So I now completely forgive him for nicking my expensive foam core. And here are the notes. He said to me, animate the idea, make concrete the shape of history, understand the order present in chaos, understand it in your head so you can feel it in your gut, reveal the simple human needs behind the creation of complex human systems. And by the way, that was not only the credo, which we kind of recited every day as we were developing the design for the Lehman trilogy, but it became incredibly useful for almost anything that we, and I'm sure many of you and many others, undertake. Understand the simple human needs behind the creation of complex human systems. And in this particular case, the revolving glass box became a way to really talk about the passage of time, to talk about 150 years, 3 generations. And very interestingly, Sam, in directing this, had to deal with this singular motion, singular axis of motion. This thing only revolved, didn't do anything else. And you were stuck with it for 3 hours, and you only had 3 people in it and a piano. And what was interesting when I spoke to him afterwards, we were talking about 1917, the wonderful First World War film that I'm sure many of you have seen. And actually the idea for the central idea for filming that piece from a sort of third-person player perspective of a shooting game in a way, came as a result of Sam having worked with this instrument and worked with the restraint of only being able to deal in one axis of motion. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it's another clock. It's another clock, really. This is quite a funny sketch because not least it's got Tim's phone number on it, and I don't know who Tim is, but I'm wondering if one day I should call him just to find out who he is. This was a sketch of the very first pop concert that I had a go at making. And as you can see, time is the main ingredient of this event. It's on the left. I'm not going to zoom in because I might mess up. Last time I tried to zoom in, it messed up my communications. I'm not going to do that, but you've probably got better eyesight than me. On the left, you can see I was writing down all these cues and giving all the time for each of the cues. And what I learned, actually, this was this concert for a band called Wire, a wonderful post-punk band, which began in these basic sketches. And in fairness, I've just kind of broken my own rule because I said that I'm really interested in cubes that move. It's true to say that these cubes did not move. But my interest there was really in sort of anatomizing a rock band and to try and break it down, to try and understand the form of it a bit more. But something quite interesting occurred to me when I was preparing to give you this talk a bit, because I was thinking about time. And I was thinking about the fact that we're missing this quality of time. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute so I can just talk to you, because I don't need to show that slide for ages. So having sort of realized that this is what we're missing, I then got to thinking about the quality of time in a rock concert and why sometimes it isn't that nourishing, actually. I spent quite a lot of this lockdown period scrutinizing and critiquing not just my practice, but the many genres in which I practice. Because, by the way, if you can't practice, you might as well sit and cogitate your practice and try and work out where you can improve it. And one of the things that occurred to me was, I remember when I used to go to gigs when I was young. I didn't go to many. I went to basically whatever was on at the Tunbridge Wells Assembly Rooms, which was basically the Nolan Sisters. And then a bit later it was the Boomtown Rats, which I did really enjoy. And when I came to London, I remember the first gig I went to at Brixton Academy, which was the Ramones. And this was back in sort of late 80s or something. And you see, my experience of the Boomtown Rats and Ramones is when the concert ended, the fans did not want the concert to end. So they would just roar, encore, roar until the band came back. And then the first time I really went to see a show in an arena was actually a show that I'd worked on. It was the Touch the Sky tour with Kanye in 2005. And it was sort of a convention center rather than an arena, I guess, in Miami. And I hadn't really been to one before, but here I was and I'd made one. And at the end, everyone left. The audience sort of clapped. There was, this sort of fake encore thing where the show ended, lights went out for a minute, band went off, then lights came back up and the sort of, prepared encore happened. And then when that ended, the audience didn't demand more. And I was really shocked. I was genuinely shocked. And I said to the team around me, who I'd only just got to know, and I said, why don't the audience beg for more? Why aren't they staying? Why aren't they screaming for more songs and shouting out the names of the songs they want? And they said, oh no, the audience know that there is no more. They know that the time code has finished. They know that the time code has ended, and that's the end of the track. They know that there's no more track. And of course, this to me was a bit of a revelation, that of course the audiences are so smart. Audiences have that knowledge. So they know that actually I'm talking about this quality of primordial exchange of time in an idealized performance situation. But actually already the digital experience of time has already massively intruded in our performance experience. And actually when you go to a pop concert, if ever you go and you feel that concert's slightly being run on autopilot, or even a musical or any large scale show or any show, if you're feeling in your gut that it's slightly being run on autopilot and you're not really feeling that nourished by it at a spiritual level, it's probably because it is being run on autopilot. That's probably why you feel like that. It's probably because the time code, which is the kind of skeletal structure, and very useful, by the way, because it keeps all the different departments together. But sometimes the time code is literally playing the lights. If you have a lighting designer who's literally driving the chases and the sweeps directly off the time code, then sometimes that kind of very useful skeleton that we use to link all of our departments together can just get exposed too close to the surface. And that's sometimes perhaps why you may feel unnourished. So I guess I've kind of reached my half an hour point where I wanted to invite some questions. And really, I guess what I've wanted to communicate is two things. What I've been grieving for, because I really am in a state of profound grief for the lack of being surrounded by at least 70 people, but preferably 100,000 occasionally, and some very loud music, and the quality of affirmation of an older form of timekeeping. So I guess I'm in grief for that, but equally, this period has been incredibly rich in terms of self-scrutiny and scrutiny of the various areas in which I practice, which are many. And I just want to say one thing. You may have, if you've had a time, I made a little masterclass. The first thing I did really in the lockdown was to make a little BBC masterclass on my own in the studio, which was a really quite helpful thing to do. It helped me to just be on my own and get back in touch with some of the most basic processes that underlie a lot of the work. But one of the things that kept occurring to me when I was on my own in the studio, little phrases of poetry kept coming into my head. And one of them was this phrase, which I didn't really know where it came from. It was this phrase, it just kept recurring. It was, these bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. And in my head, I thought it was from Wordsworth or Tintin Abbey or something. And then I realized, of course, it was Shakespeare. And when I mentioned this to one of the producers I was working with, she said, I think this was from a sonnet that Shakespeare wrote while he was in quarantine. Because, of course, the plague was rife during so much of Shakespeare's period. And indeed it was, written in 1609, which was a plague year. And, I have found quite a lot of consolation in that actually, you know, what Shakespeare did when the theatres were very frequently closed due to the plague was he turned inward, I guess, and he wrote poetry and he developed other skills, which then, you know, came back and enriched his practice with an audience. So yeah, that's my pandemic so far. I'm now going to see if any of you have written a question in this chat. If you haven't, please write one, because there's nothing worse than throwing open a talk to questions and being met with the resounding silence of a lack of questions. I've got 18 in the chat. Here we go. All right. So 18, and we haven't got that much time, but let's see. This is from Yaraba. How do you approach a script, a play versus music, a concert? Do you find one project is easier than another to design? I'm going to answer that by telling you that everything I work on starts pretty much with a primary text. I'm sort of a secondary text maker. So even when I make my own work, I write a primary text and respond to it. So I have this, like I've been doing with you the last half an hour, I have a conversation with myself. So really the script is the primary text in a play, whereas in a concert, the primary text is the lyrics and the music. So there's no difference there. The difference mainly is the number of peripheral factors, because in any collaboration, it's an overlap between my interests, which have been recurring, as I showed you a few things, you know, the cube, the line of light, these things ebb and flow and surface and wax and wane throughout the years and through various different media and genre. So I'm always trying to find common denominators between my evolving interests and those of my collaborators. And it can be hard when there's too many people. It can just get a bit dissipated. So if one's working with a musician directly, that can be incredibly powerful. But if one's working with a musician and too many of their peripheral structures, that can be just a bit diluting, and the work can get diluted. Equally, that can happen with a number of collaborators on a play. It can happen with anyone. So I wouldn't say the play versus concert is easier or harder. It's really all to do with the quality of engagement with the collaborators. Do you think that the ideas you had at the beginning of your career, as you're starting out, this is from Lotte Lawson, as you're starting out, were as ambitious as the ones you're having now? Or do you think as your budgets have grown, your ideas have grown too? Do you know what's a really useful budget? Is your own budget of your own ignorance. Because it's when you're really ignorant that you do really interesting stuff that you wouldn't do when you become less ignorant, honestly. But part of my practice has been to, as I've got a little settled in any part of in any genre, I've noticed that my work's become less interesting when I know the rules too much. So what I've tended to do, I've not so much consciously, but I've observed that this has been happening is, for example, theatre for 10 years, actually towards the sort of mid-2000s, that's where my work really, you'll notice on my website and in my book, you won't see much of the work from the mid-2000s because it wasn't very good. It got a little bit sort of, I sort of knew what I was doing. And my relationships were sort of, you know, ebbing along. So that's when the ideas started to be less ambitious, less interesting. So whenever you are a little bit of an outsider to a process, you generally have an idea. You might not even think it's ambitious. You just don't know where the walls are. So you walk closer to them until you hit into them. And that's where interesting stuff happens. So I think that that hasn't so much been a trajectory of growing ambition with growing budget. It's always been a trajectory of ambition being commensurate with ignorance of what's possible, and therefore almost artificially trying to return often to that state of ignorance or innocence. Patricia Martinez, interesting. We have even moved our position towards time. The Greeks understood that the future came from behind and the past was moving away. Now we look at the future and we turn our backs on the past. It's really interesting, and actually a work that we made a couple of nights ago, because we did actually make some work. Great moment. We made some work on the roof at Peckham, Bold Tendencies. And this was a reprise of a work that we'd made years ago with Carlo Rovelli, the theoretical physicist, on the nature of time. And of course, what he'll tell you is there's nothing to support in physics time as a phenomenon. It really is entirely a figment of our imagination. And really all we're doing is the suspension of our memory of the last moment and our anticipation of the next. And that is the illusion of time, a collective fiction. Steam pump coffee machine, Peter says, do you consciously design elements to be captured on a phone and shared? Would you prefer people to just watch and experience the event? Remember it as a memory that grows with time. Well, see, I've got a funny theory about this. I think people capture it on their phone, but not for themselves. See, I don't think people watch back the concerts. When you look over a concert and they're all holding their phones, I don't think people are doing that because they want to watch it later or even because they want to share it. I think it's something more profound than that. I honestly think, if I'm really honest, that as a species, somehow, in terms of this memory of the future, I think we do already remember a future in which we no longer exist. And I think we are, therefore, memorializing ourselves and documenting ourselves and self-surveying ourselves as a memorial to a future in which we no longer exist. So that's what I think is happening. Any thoughts on what you can do beyond chat to feel the reaction emotions of a digital audience, like you feel the reaction emotion of an audience in person? Well, this is really interesting because I was talking today to a composer, and we're talking about something we're trying to make for a show that inshallah will happen later this year. And he's composing the score, and he said, listen, I can't get an orchestra together. And I said, well, can't you just get all the players and layer it up? He said, listen, it will never sound the same. It'll never sound the same. And I said, is that true for choirs as well? Because there's this beautiful Eric Whitaker virtual choir. He said, yeah, the instrument of 1,000 bodies resonating next to each other is never going to sound the same as us layering up these individual resonances. So I do not think we can achieve the same thing. I think there is a beautiful medium that can absolutely draw our emotions digitally, and it's called film. It's a wonderful medium. And I think watch as many of them as we can during this period where we can't watch things live is what I really think, and use this medium for other things like this talk. Or like many other things. I am pretty interested. I'm pretty interested in lots of digital things. I'm really interested in Google Earth. When I go running, I run through Costa Rica in Google Earth. I'm interested in the travel that I can do when I don't travel, and the lack of guilt about my carbon footprint when I run around Google Earth and scrutinize the streets and the nooks and crannies that I can't go to physically. And I think, there's something very interesting digitally in digital travel. From Monica Same, how do you start a design process with different performances? Do you start with the individuality of the artist singer and the music and its rhythm? Or do you start with a vision and a feeling that you want to reach? Do you know what? If I'm honest, I start where I left off. I come to every project with a pair of glasses on that were shaped by the last project I was working on. And I think this is not unusual from colleagues that I work with. I think we turn up as a bunch of collaborators, all wearing these project-shaped glasses from the last project we were on, and there's this beautiful cross-fertilization of stuff we didn't do, but that the colleagues we're now working with did. So I generally pick up where I left off. I'm stitching together from one project to the next, which is a source of great frustration to many people I'm working with who want nothing to do with the thing I've just done and say, well, why are you coming to me with this, egg-shaped thing? I thought you were the cube lady. You just done an egg, things like that. So that's often the starting point. And then, of course, there's this beautiful, there's always this wonderful moment when a whole new world opens of research, because you come to each project knowing nothing. You realize you knew nothing. I've just started working in a country I've never worked in before. I knew nothing about the country. I've had to read books on it, and of course, this is the same with artists and singers, but it's important to come with ignorance again, because otherwise what you end up making is an expression of your own intoxication with the research. And that's kind of interest, but less interesting than if you'd really come with your thread, right? You're carrying this little red thread through your life. So come with the strands of that all you know, ready to be woven onto, but make sure that's solid as you walk in the room, and then, you know, be ready to learn everything new. Thank you, Alexa Smith. Love the sculptures. I'm slightly going over my time now because I'm meant to stop at 6:45, but we do have until 7. So shall I continue to answer these questions or not? Yes? People have bothered to ask them. So I'll carry on. And by the way, if you just start leaving because you're bored, I won't be offended because it's past 6:45. You might have fish to fry. That's fair enough. Do not worry if you just basically bugger off. I won't mind. Okay, anyway, I'm going to answer these questions because there's some nice ones here. Live performance design, especially theatre. This is Cindy. I'm slightly blind, so I think it's Cindy Lynn. Live performance design, especially theatre, often is a difficult career, working with menial budgets and being poorly paid. Was there a turning point in your career where your productions and budget got much bigger, where you felt that you could make a living as an artist? Well, this is where I have to come clean and say I'm a super privileged person in that I didn't pay any rent when I was training. I had a boyfriend who was 8 years older than me. Much to his father's annoyance, I didn't contribute anything because I was studying and then working in theatre. I do ask myself, I wonder, would I have found a way to pay the rent if I hadn't had my very long-suffering boyfriend at the time? I reckon I probably would. I like to think I would, but I don't know. I only know my own experience. So that's me coming out as the privileged person I was. And this is, of course, a big problem with our industry, is that it attracts privileged people like me who can afford to do it, which is why there's a lack of diversity in it, which is something that we are desperately trying to address in various ways, which I could talk more about on a different talk. But to answer your point, was there a moment? There was really. Yeah, but it didn't come till I was about 28. Actually, afterwards. I remember when I was 28, I got a different boyfriend who was less prepared to pay the rent. And I just remember my bank account when I was 28, and all I had was my student loan. I just had a 10 grand overdraft, I think, when I was 28. I reckon I started actually earning money. The first time I probably wasn't in debt was probably 2000 and I'm going to say 2003 or 4, 2005, around then. Someone figure out that how old that made me, because I don't want to think about it right now. But anyway, yeah, it took a while. But you know what? You know, basically you have to look at it a different way. If once you start, as I am beginning to now, making artworks, you realize that if you're a pure artist, you spend much of your time actually raising the funds to get your work made. So stop thinking about, are you getting paid? Someone is actually building your stuff. This is amazing. You are making a work of art and someone is building it for you. Someone is paying for all the materials. And I mean, I think we're quite, certainly the way I came into theatre, I was terribly spoiled and privileged. I was like, oh, why are they only paying me 2 grand? And actually, once you start entering the world of, you know, wanting to make things material, large scale projects in the art world, and raising the kind of budgets it takes, you know, not just the budget for building the object, but the budget for all the other paraphernalia. That's you could spend all your life doing that in the art world. And in theatre, you've got these laid on opportunities. So even if you're not paid much, you really are developing your practice in a way that in the pure art world is much harder. So I do have a different approach to it now. How can artists, this is from Kenneth Chan, how can artists and performers reach audiences with fuller impact beyond the confines of video conferencing tools, which have now become the primary mode of staging shows in the current situation? Well, listen, I'm pretty interested in the big screens, the adverts. Piccadilly Circus, you know, that is being used by some artists at the moment. Actually, they're doing small scale artworks every night at 2020, 8:20. There's a small artwork, 2 minutes. We'll be making this work up there too. I think gradually we may start to look at, there was a big, you know, Rooseveltian project in the 30s during the Depression where he saw that buildings were boarded up and he saw that artists were unemployed, so he commissioned murals to pay the artists to do something with the boarded up buildings. So it may be that these, you know, big advertising screens, which really don't have, if you stand in Piccadilly Circus, you'll notice that there's only really Coca-Cola and Samsung up there right now, because I think the advertising revenues are right down. So maybe this is a congruence of need, need for stuff to put on those screens and need for work for people to make stuff to put on the screen. So we're looking at that. Outside, I'm all for outside, and it's irritating that this rule of 6 has come in. But Regent's Park Theatre is still going on. There's various outside things. It's annoying that we have shitty cold weather and we don't want to catch flu right now. But, they do it in Sweden. They put coats on and they light fires and things. So I think outside, I just think everyone feels safer outside. So yeah, let's try and make more stuff outside. Really curious to know what you thought of Tenet, says Justin Bramwell, and its manipulation of time, if you've seen it. So I'm gonna have to come back to you on that. I am longing to see it, and I will see it. And people keep telling me I'm gonna love it, and I will, but I haven't seen it yet. And Jodie Gilliam, as a designer, do you get the chance to be proactive and suggest texts or projects to directors, commissioners for collaboration, or are you reliant on approaches from people who've already had an idea for a piece? If the second, how do you manage this reactive way of working as someone with their own creative process? Do you know, it's a really good question, because it's taken me 25 years to actually summon up the courage to do exactly as, I wish you'd asked me this question 25 years ago and I might have got my courage up earlier. But literally now I've started to slightly rework the hierarchies a little, where I will have an idea of something I want to make. Often it's not what I call an absolute pure generation of an idea. It's often in the form of what I technically term a hijack. So the hijack is a technical term for when someone asks you to do something and you hijack their money and do something that you want to do that isn't what they thought they wanted, but in the end is what we think they wanted in the end, or you tell them that it is, and we all agree that it is what they wanted. So this hijack is my new technical term for my practice often. And I really, really recommend hijack as a practice, because often the people with the money are not the people who really know what to do with the money. So in my recent hijacks, what I've started doing is hijacking some money in a project and then hijacking someone who I know is a great collaborator and a great director of actors rather than objects, because I can direct objects and light, but I don't have 25 years of the profound psychology required to direct people. And equally, directing objects and light and color is going to consume most of your brain space. So getting deep into the psychology of every performer on the stage at the same time is tough. So yeah, I have begun to do exactly that. I've begun to now say, listen, I'd like to do this, and I'd like this person to do it with me, and sort of, as the designer, be the leader on the project rather than the server of a project. And I do encourage any of you who are designers to do the same, because if we all just start doing it, I'm a little bit fussy about nomenclature, and I keep using this word stage sculpture, and I keep saying that my name is artist and designer, because the word set designer, useful as it is, needed a bit of a boot up the bum, I felt, because of I didn't quite feel that it was quite representing the generation of idea that sometimes takes place in that role. So sometimes just fiddling around with the naming of things can be helpful. And Hannah Barbara says, has the current situation changed your design process, and what do you think it means for the future of the set designer, future of set design? Well, yes, if there are no shows, then there won't be too much environment to create around shows. I think in the short term, in the immediate term, I think what certainly I'm being asked to look at is how to design the audience. We spent a lot of the lockdown designing audience geometry and trying to fall in love with it. I don't know if any of you have seen, there was a beautiful image of people in little pig pens in Newcastle. There was a gig that happened in the pig pens. And I can't tell you how many proposals I've received of versions of these pig pens. Some of them have special places for your phone. Some of them have, places for your drink. But listen, they're pig pens. They did the job, but there's more to be done there. And I think there will be a need for designers to make beautiful mazes effectively for audience so they can be kept. And if you think about it, when the plague shut down the Elizabethan theatre, in the 16th, 17th century, when theatre was restored, when theatre came back, It was the proscenium theatre in many ways. It was the Restoration Theatre. And guess what? There were boxes. The posh people didn't want to sit with the shitty plague-ridden people. So that's where those little boxes came from. So we've been through this boxes, pigpen business. So I think that will be important. And I think, listen, we've all had time to think more about our responsibilities towards the residual trace that our so-called ephemeral temporary work leaves. So I think we will all be thinking much more. There will be tight budgets. And we, like the fashion industry, will be looking at what we call recycling dead stock, upscaling, recycling, not chucking things away, using bits and pieces that can get reused and can, be revived and reincarnated in various ways. There'll be lots of thinking around that. It'll change. It will change. Nikki says, do you engage directly with the teams who plan and execute your installations? Do you collaborate with a range of outside execution teams? How many of the planning production do you do in-house versus collaborating with outside vendors and agencies? I've got 8 people in my house, and it is really in my house because this is my house and my studio's downstairs. And they mainly, what they're doing mainly is translating from idea to drawings, renders then drawings. So that's what's happening in-house. Everything else is out of the house. So when people come around my studio, they're super disappointed because it's just computers and one big pair of hands. I could put that there to sort of alleviate the disappointment, because some people think there's going to be lovely big sets and stuff. And like photographers go, oh, we'll photograph you in your studio with all your sets. It's like, oh, I'm really sorry. There's just some Apple Macs here. Yes, so with many, many teams, hundreds of teams, hundreds and hundreds of people, literally on every project. I mean, we're working on about 15 projects at the moment. And I'd say an average on some of the larger projects, maybe of 100, 150 people, even at this stage. Smaller projects, maybe 10 or 20 people, but a lot. If I were really to do a family tree of all the people working, it's many, many. And then once we get to actually building and operating, of course, it's many more. Okay, I think this might actually just go, this call, in 2 minutes. So I'm going to have to stop. I don't want to get cut off mid-sentence because I think it might just go ping and time out. So I'm going to say a beautiful farewell to you all. I'm sorry I didn't get to the end of the lovely questions. I see some real juicy ones down there, but I'll take note. Maybe Hannah, keep the questions so I can answer them in some other way. Farewell, everybody. Thank you for attending this talk. Have a gorgeous, gorgeous evening. It's nice and warm out there. Enjoy the sunshine. Good night.